Welcome to the podcast, Dean Mumm.
Thanks, mate. And pleasure to be here.
So just a bit of context for the listener. Dean played rugby for the Wallabies, and for non-Commonwealth, non-rugby playing, I'm just basically thinking of American listeners. The Wallabies are the Australian rugby team, and you played for them 57 times, captained once, I
Once, yeah,
believe,
just once. Yep.
just once, which is not nothing. And amongst other things we'll get into, you also trek to the North Pole post rugby. So that's an accomplishment in of itself. We also went to school together and played rugby together for a time. You more successfully than me. I'll start with a Dean Mumm anecdote, if you don't mind, which is
Yeah.
you might not recall this, but when we were playing together in your first season in the ones in 2001, which, given that it was bracketed by two of the more successful seasons in King School rugby history, 2001 was not that. And I was a good rugby player, not great, not even very good, but I was at a stage where I was considering, rugby or rowing, wanted to keep playing sport. What does that look like? I think that's a normal thing at that time. And we were in training doing some drill. I can't remember what, but you tackled me. I landed on this shoulder and did something to my AC joint, missed 4 weeks in the middle of the season. So then came back in the twos, no rep, nothing, no real encouragement to keep playing rugby, which meant that the options between rowing and rugby became more pronounced. And so I feel like you helped nudge me towards a couple of Olympic Games. So I don't know if you're aware of any of that, but that's how I always remember the fork in the road.
Yeah, right. No, I'm not actually. And listen, I was giggling to myself because I'd actually have been involved in other people's injuries over the years as well. And you kind of forget it. But I did I was involved in a tackle where someone else broke their collarbone in training as well. So AC joint's not too bad.
No.
But listen, I'm not going to say you're welcome because I think your work ethic and intent was always the key to your success wherever you chose. So it wasn't going to matter whether you chose rugby or rowing. You were gonna wring the sponge as hard as you possibly could, and that was it's for as long as my memory for you, that was predestined into what you were going to do. And so it really was a choice. And if you were steered one way, I mean, I feel like I may not have been a fork in the road, but you're probably going to succeed in whatever it was. But I do remember you having your whatever it's called, moose juice, which is your I hate. I mean, I don't even know if it was in that concoction of. It was sort of bluish in colour. If I get some sort of memory, it could have been detergent for all I know. But you drank it religiously when you were at school, and so your commitment to experimenting on yourself was well ingrained early on.
When you're low on talent, you have to pull what levers you have.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to talk about, and this is informed by my memory, but also what you went on to do. You captained the Wallabies once, but you captained professionally and at school more than you didn't. And by the time we're in the same year at school, and you were on the younger side of things, so you were often playing the year group below, but you were always the captain, and you captained the first 15 for 2 years. And then you finished. Well, towards the end of your career, you were the captain of Exeter for a few
Yep.
years. So it's not as though it was a point in time. It was more common than not. And because you started early, I wonder what you think, what characteristics you possessed that made you the person that when a coach is picking an underage team and they need to have a captain, that they go, oh, may as well be Dean. And then if that was like something you were conscious of that you were trying to do, or something that even within your family or your dad, or some attribute that he said, you should take responsibility. Do you have any recollection of any of that?
No, I'm not sure how it organically happened. I think there's a couple of things that are helpful in a captain. One, particularly in a rugby team, but probably in any circumstance in sport. One, you know, you've got to be able to get picked, which I was never a guarantee in any sense, to be fair. I certainly don't feel I was in any team, but I certainly was in a position maybe where it was a greater likelihood that I could get picked, and I think that's important. I think you want your leader to be on the field for most of the game. I think I play in a position where you're generally on the field for all 80 minutes in this context. So again, maybe it's just a personal belief, but I do like my captain to start and finish a game. And then also, I was closer to the action, always closer to the referee. So I think that's if you're a forward, I'm going to talk rugby terms for your fans, but a forward is always near the referee where the stoppage of play would happen. So it's more likely or not that you can have a conversation with them as opposed to a fullback or somebody completely removed. Or in a soccer or football context, you're less likely to have a goalie. You're more likely to have a midfielder, just in terms of access and proximity to the decision. So I think there's a few things in there. I also think I had Kiwi parents, and so rugby was the sport, and when my wife asked my dad, because we got two young boys, how did you sort of manage that balance between choosing different forms of football or whatever? He goes, easy, I just enrolled him in one. Like rugby was always was going to be my sport because I had two parents and in particular a dad that loved it. So we watched a lot of footy. We talked about it. It was a conversation we talked about a lot. So I think inherently I had a good understanding about the game from an early on, and maybe it's the understanding piece and proximity probably means that you're more likely. Probably also never hurts when at that stage when we were growing up that the captain of the Wallabies was also in my position. So people are looking at, can we replicate?
There's John Eales,
like not
right?
just a full lemon, yeah, John Eales, and so maybe there's an element, but over a period of time, and I heard a military guy talk about this after a while. Is once you're in the military, once you start appointing people to positions of leadership, then you expect their behaviours to be representative of leadership. And so over a period of time, then I think through an age group level it happens, but then your behaviour needs to match that of the expectation. And so inherently that forms your patterns of behaviour or your habits, and therefore you're more likely in the future to be leadership again. And I think that's probably as the transition happened, as I was coming through into national age group sides, etc., that I always felt like that was the way that I got the best out of myself. And so maybe there was a continuation of that behaviour as well.
Self-perpetuating.
Yeah, in a way, but if people look at you in a certain way, sometimes you step into that, but then also as you say, become self-perpetuating from there on in.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Given that we went to the same school, and you've got two boys, and so I've got one, but you start kicking the tires on what that might look like for your kids, and reflect at times on what your experience was like for better or worse. And I'd say that maybe there are some deficiencies when it comes to our school. Not the most academic heavy, although we've had plenty of good students and people with plenty of cognitive skill, but it never really felt like academics was emphasized or celebrated as much as sport. And if I look at some of the athletes our school was able to produce, and if you look at just you and I from our year, to have a Wallaby and an Olympian is not common, but then we had exactly the same thing from the year behind.
Yeah.
There was another Wallaby and another Olympian. And so it had to have a lot to do with the environment. It couldn't just be a matter of coincidence. When you think of the certain characteristics, or do you think do you put it down to the place itself, or how do you attribute what went on there?
Yeah, I think that's. I think you've got to be fortuitous. I mean, obviously, there's an element of luck in there. The fact that we've got totally separate backgrounds outside of school to come together in the same format. I also, growing up, we had four Wallabies or four national representatives in a junior in a local club side, like junior sport under tens. We had four Wallabies in the same side. Now that is just pure luck. Like there's no environment that could come to determine that. But when it came to school, then I think you do get it, but also it's the nature of the focus of the environment as well. And I think you can probably say that from a university level, etc. As you move on, when it becomes it was kind of sport at the school we went to was a cultural pillar in a way, and it would like to. It was the creation of this all round person, of which sport was a really central piece. Now, it was not, it was certainly common in the type of schools we went to, but not common at all for schools to have sport that was compulsory. And so it came a focus of how you wanted the person to develop. And I think that's why perhaps most of us can move on into the work life effectively because we've played a lot of team sport as
Yeah.
well. So I think that it definitely was a cultural influence from the school, but also from the boys themselves. Like it was something that as a youngster that we definitely aspired to be, and you go where your energy is because you wanted to be that type of person. And so rugby was a big pillar of our school, and so we just lent into it. But there's a balance of luck and otherwise. I think um, you know there is a point in time, and I reflect on it a lot, where your work ethic overtakes talent, and so even if we had a great talented bunch at school, doesn't mean necessarily you get the result afterwards. And I think that the other people within that we played with that went on to have successful professional sporting careers had to at some stage take their own initiative and step on with it as well.
Almost certainly, because I could think of guys that you and I both played with at that age that, or competed with in various sports that likely had more talent that didn't go on with it. Like, I'm not sure if you remember Chris Chan, who was,
Yeah,
yeah, so he was year above, but played with us, and he would have been near 100 kilos in the under 14s. And all you had to do was stay near that guy as he ran. And your main responsibility was to try and jump over the bodies that he'd thrown out of the way on the way to the try line, and just absolute specimens. I never, like, obviously you're a big rig, but not unusually big for the sport of rugby.
no,
And yet you were able to leverage what you had to make a career of it.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. No, by no means am I a big unit. I don't think I was inherently. I didn't win the genetic lottery like some of the. I feel like a number of people I played with were just so athletically gifted. Like Israel Folau or a number of other Tatafu, Pollard, like Wycliffe Parley, just these incredibly powerful athletes that have is skillful and powerful, which is not always necessarily the connection point. And yet, there's other people that just find their way through, and it's
Yeah.
kind of the balance. And it's also the beauty of, I think, from a training point of view, I imagine. I don't have any aspiration to be a strength and conditioning coach, but it must be one of the elements that makes it particularly exciting when you've got all these different bodies to try and have to get operating on.
It's one of the pillars of rugby, I guess, in that there is space for a lot of different body types. I mean, there's no one that's really skinny or slender, but there's certainly tall and short and bigger and a little bit finer. But that has been one of the things I've always appreciated is there's a lot of different positions that require different body types. So you could leverage what ability you have towards a specific position and make of it what you can.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I heard this. It was a great comment, I suppose, a joke from Joe Roth, who was one of the Wallaby greats, and he said that the rugby was the original sport of diversity because we always picked the fat kids first. And it's true. There's space for everyone of every size, and that's why I think it's a great sport because the fat kid gets to play up front and basically have immense pressure put on their neck and spine. Should they choose to embrace it, that was your position.
That was
All the way through to the slender kids that are agile, that have got speed, and there's space for everyone. And I think that's one of the great reasons that so many people can get involved in it.
Yeah. When you were at school and playing, going up the year levels and getting picked for representative teams, played for Australian schoolboys. You captain Australian schoolboys.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So at that stage, were you thinking, I'm going to press on with the sport and press on with rugby and see how far I can go with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's generally the rule. I mean, I don't say I'd ever had not one of these stories where all I ever dreamt of being was a Wallaby and committed to it. It wasn't my bag. I think I wanted to get. I often think I was motivated by trying to maximise the potential I had, as opposed to not giving it a shot. And also, I enjoyed it, and my identity was inherently tied to it as well. So I think often as a young athlete, you identify as the nature of the athlete you are, and it's important to give it a red hot shot. And I think that's kind of where it had, and it also kept going, well for me, and a lot of my good mates were doing it as well. So you kind of like, well, nothing from like my old man had to give up chasing his dream because he couldn't become a professional. He had to choose to go work. A lot of sports are like that. A lot of Olympic sports are like that, where you have to find the balance. Rugby, you could make an income. I wanted to travel. It was one of the things I wanted to do. There's opportunities to do that. I did live in the UK for a couple of years. It wasn't a lot, and you could still study and do it at the same time. I didn't quite do it in the same sense that you did, but still had opportunities to go to university that I could leverage, my skill in rugby. And so I went to Sydney Uni because that was part of the offering there as well.
Yeah. And were you thinking I need to do the studying and emphasize that because there's going to be, no matter which way this goes, there's going to be a career after rugby. Being an athlete is for a period in time. What did you study at uni?
I did an undergrad in business and then a master's of commerce while I was playing, but which sounds like it was all logical. But I mean, as an athlete, and I got many mates like this, where my undergrad took 10 years.
Yeah.
And then and most of the time was via correspondence, and then I actually did my master's at night while I was still playing as well. So it's not a linear journey, that one. I just was smart enough and probably was advised well enough by people around me to just keep going and not give up. Because the easy choice is to really dive yourself into the sport, particularly as early on in your athletic career, the load is so large. And I just remember first pre-seasons and where you're just exhausted as you're sort of building this capacity. But in the later years, you can manage that load quite respectively and then still do lots of other things alongside with it. So I'm really pleased I didn't give up early. But also I need to thank sort of player athlete managers, welfare managers, and people that kept me on track, and had a guy that would in one stage, Lockie McBain was his name. He's a great guy at the Waratahs where I played, but he went and enrolled for me. He went and sorted out all my transcripts and all this stuff that you just need help as a hapless athlete. Sometimes you need someone to grab the wheel, and he did that, and he was really, really instrumental in me getting an undergrad degree.
So what was the delta? Because often players mature at different speeds, and there's your freaks that are knocking around the professional level as a teenager, but that's not normal. Usually it takes a few years to bridge that gap. But it seems as though you, even from the start, if your undergrad was spaced out over that time, the rugby obligations were significant. So how quickly was it, professional?
Well, there's two elements. One, I always think professional is mentality rather than an occupation. And so, but was I professional was in that context? Probably not either, because I never thought I probably didn't have a handle on it as much as I could in terms of doing everything I absolutely could. But I was I was in an academy straight after school, and that was 4 mornings a week, or it was 6 days a week when I was in pre-season, then 4 mornings a week at 6 a.m. And it was a 45-minute drive from home. So, you're into it pretty quick in terms of mentality, but then you had your club training at night and then games on the weekend. So we would have seven, eight interactions of training or playing across the course of the week. So you do have to start to make choices pretty quickly. And I also think, the whole sacrifice mentality is, probably not you just got to make choices that you want to prioritize one over the other. And for me, that was never really much of an issue. I wanted to do it, and here was an opportunity. Wanted to maximise that. So the choice is pretty easy. You could go in the Cairns on the Wednesday night. You could turn up to training on Thursday morning. Sometimes you do both, but you couldn't do it all the time. And so, but I actually think that journey was great. But professionally, as in terms of time and commitment, was probably pretty quick. But I didn't start getting paid until I think my first contract was when I was 22 or something, 23, and it was it was 35K a year. It wasn't a hell of a lot of money, but it was a shitload at that age compared to nothing. So you were probably
Sure, and to do the thing you're already willing to do.
Yeah, you're kind of getting paid for something you're already going to do. Yeah, no, that's the right way to do it. It's like I would have turned up to all those training sessions should I be invited. I was validated in a way with a paycheck.
Yeah, I remember Matt Ryan and I. This is another schoolmate of ours, and also someone that at a point in time had to choose between rugby and rowing. And when we could tell you, no matter how modestly you were paid in the early days, you're probably still doing better than us.
I was very aware of that, given the conversations that sort of Maddie and I would have, or you and I would have, probably a little bit more rarer. But I also we were pretty fortunate because also was centralised money. You didn't have to go source it. It wasn't predicated on performance either. Which so much of Olympic funding is. And so, you turn up day one, I knew it was coming at the end of the year, and it was probably there to like year after if I did a reasonable job.
Yeah, I mean, it is based on performance, but not quite in the same way. It's not, the equivalent would be that based on how the Waratahs performed, that would determine how much you got paid, regardless of your individual performance.
Yeah, I mean, there's performance bonuses, there's match fees and things. There's ways to maximise it, but I knew where the bottom line was the whole time.
Yeah. Thinking about this conversation that we're going to have, and knowing that we both played team sports where you need to get selected. So there's some process. Someone's going to determine whether you're on the field or not. And you were historically growing up, like you're getting picked, and as you get into a bigger pond as a smaller fish, that becomes more difficult. It's also your profession, and people want to be good at their job, especially people that end up as elite athletes. When you're outside of training and thinking about how do I get better at this, what was the way and what was the thing that you emphasized in terms of both improving your performance on the field but increasing the likelihood that you'd be put on the field in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good comment. It's not, I actually haven't given it a hell of a lot of thought, which probably means it went okay. Not in an arrogant way, but it was never. I mean, probably what I'm trying to say is it wasn't a conscious thought, as opposed to the way to get picked and I do think you need a bit of luck in there as well, because you do need, particularly if there's very good people in front of you, which there was on most, particularly earlier in my career, there's really, Dan Vickerman and, Justin Harrison early on, but then, Al Kanar, and it was some really, really good players in there. Will Corbell's another one that's sort of around our age at school. You did need a bit of luck to get in, but you did also need to have enough form as such to be given that opportunity. But I think all of it just stems back to, I think, you've just got to be quite comfortable that you've given all that you've kind of, I don't say all of you got, because you've just got to be comfortable that you've done the work to be able to earn the opportunity, because the opportunity will come, whether it's in a pre-season trial or something like that, you will get a shot at it. But, are you ready? Are you willing? Is someone willing to take a risk on you to get picked when the opportunity comes up? And that was fortunate enough. And I think from a grade point of view, when I was coming through, as a sort of domestic competition to the Shoot Shield here in Sydney, one of the guys got suspended, so I got an opportunity in that one. That was the first grand final I played in at a sort of a super rugby level, which is, sort of professional. In the professional, a guy did his knee, and so then got the opportunity to then have it to go in from there. And so you've got to then take your opportunity. So there, you've got to be quite confident that you've done the work in order to get on with it. But there was a couple of conversations I had along the way where you do get fronted up as to, are you where you need to be? And either that will come from, the most effective of those conversations come from a senior leader within your team, I think. And I played with Phil Orr a lot. He was my first captain. You always pretty much knew where you stood, and he could really just shred you on your quality of performance just by looking at you sometimes, because you just knew if it wasn't good enough that's not what he was giving. And so that is the environment in that one is really powerful. But also had a conversation with Ewan McKenzie, who was the coach there, and he was reviewing some of my club games, and then he would go, okay, so I would do on average maybe hit sort of 15, 17 rucks a game, make 12 tackles, have 8 carries for a certain amount of metres. And then he goes, well, how do you think that is? And I said, I actually think I've been playing okay. And he goes, okay, well, let me just compare you with, Dan Vickerman in this circumstance. And Dan hits 25 to 30 rucks a game at sort of 85% effectiveness. He takes 7 line-outs. He makes 15 shots. 85% of those neutral or dominant. And then he said, so that's what Australian level or world class looks like. And you go, right. So then you know that your metric is not the metric that actually is the more relevant of one. So then you've got to build that capacity out. Now that takes time to do, but I do remember that conversation very clearly, saying, well, you know what, my good is not where good needs to be.
And then once you know that, you need to do something about it, or if you want to do something about it, that's the opportunity for you as a rugby player. Do you then go, okay, in a game scenario, I need to lift my work rate. I need to do more specifically what's been asked of me here in my position within the context of the team? Or is it in training, I need to, because, you're doing a lot of things, you're doing fitness stuff, you're in the gym, you've got all sorts of drills that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Is it when I'm in the gym, I need to lift more, do more reps, I need to run harder when that's an opportunity, so that gives me more capacity? Or is it all of it?
Well, I think there's a little bit of all of it. In the beauty of a sport like rugby is actually you also can be heavily competitive within a squad, but also good mates with the people with you. This is not it's not a scorched earth policy. You don't burn people on the way through. But the reality is you've got to be as good or better than the others in those environments. Now, mate, I'm a skinny guy. I I was in the weight gaining club for all 12 years of my career, like I was always light. So I was never going to maybe lift, but that meant that I had to be, from a fitness point of view, had to be at the top for my position. I also was never going to be, because when you're in a squad of different sizes and different fitness levels, you're almost competing in your own position set.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to be at the front, from a fitness point of view, so to offset that I couldn't perhaps lift as much. Or I think it comes down to the fact that the self-awareness piece, and I think that's why athletes are particularly good at, they've got a really good physical and often mental self-awareness. Because not only do you need to know what you've got to work on in order to get better, so in your context to improve the capacity, but you've also got to know why you get picked. And I think the longer it got over my career, and the advice I would give to a younger person is like, really understand what it is that's getting you picked in this squad in the first place, because it's probably likely the thing that's going to get picked in the team. So you've got to have, X factor or whatever term it is, but you've got to have a set of, capabilities that actually means that you get picked. And it's as important, if not more important, to focus on those than it is to develop your weaknesses, because if you want to keep getting picked, you've got to focus on those factors, but then you've got time to work on those weaknesses and build up capacity on other fronts. The longer across the course of my career, the more important it was to know why you got picked and what you're delivering and adding to the team and the performance, as opposed to, I know I've got to, I might have to do more tackles this week because I didn't hit the percentage I wanted to last week.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned that, on the continue, like not skinny by most people's standards, I think you played at 6'6".
Yeah, 6'6", about 112 kilos, about my playing weight, but that would fluctuate across the course of the year. So it often would start feeling good and heavy, and then you get atrophy over the course of the season, and then by the end of the year, you're holding on and you're weighing in with a wet jersey so you can hit the numbers you need to hit.
Yeah, and different players that would maintain their weight more easily. Like that's when the stimulus gets diluted a bit because you can't hit the gym as hard. You're going to start shifting towards whatever the natural is. Were you cognizant of at least trying to eat up as much as possible to maintain weight?
Yeah, I mean, in the conversations I had with dietitians, etc., over the course, it was always how do you keep or put on weight. And I think, as the genetic lottery happens, I think I'd rather have a fast metabolism than a slow one, particularly as you retire. But once you're in that environment, it was hard to put on weight because I don't know what the daily calorie rate would. It would have been pretty high, particularly in pre-season. But I knew that I needed to do three sessions. In season I'd have to do 2 sessions, a minimum 2 weight sessions a week to maintain 3 if I wanted to put any on. But really, I had to be doing 4 weight sessions a week in order to actually see some increase in muscle mass. And so, which is very easy when it comes to pre-season because you are lifting 4 times a week and you are seeing those gains. But when it comes to during the season, you might have a 6-day turnaround. You're pretty busted, pretty sore from the game, and so you don't lift the first 2 days, and you've only got one chance to get into the weights room that week. And so the natural atrophy does come across the course of the season. And I think, one of the beauties about, and you as the same, of having a longer career is actually being able to work out those things and work out where the correlation and causation points are and how to amend them. And by the back end, I knew that, subject to having 7-day turnarounds on playing, that if I could lift 3 times a week, then that would be the best maintenance across a 35 game season.
And was there an off season prior to the preseason where you could get a bit of a head start on things, or was the off season more about getting rid of some of the niggles that you'd accumulated, just decompressing and getting, prepared for the season ahead? Or could you actually add a couple of kilos of?
Yeah, one of the things I reckon is off season would be 2 weeks.
Okay.
It's not a lot.
No.
And the reality is, for most players, I think you'd probably have a niggle by round, like the fifth, sixth round in that you'd carry for the next 20. And so you just plow on and ultimately, hopefully you can get through. I mean, I sort of had this, like, I had a sore adductors on both sides, but particularly right. I had that for like 2.5 years.
Yeah.
You just had to plow on and manage your way through it and dry needling and massage and load management. But that's just what you had to do. But you didn't miss many games, but you certainly weren't perhaps physically where you needed to be either. And so there is always this fine balance between maintenance to actually get on the field to perform, and then, would it have been better just to take 3 weeks and go, nip this in the bud, and then we can move on and you've got a capability to move forward. But that's not the way it works. And no one's going to give up the chance to, if you're not actually declared unfit, no one's going to give up the chance to not play.
No.
Particularly because there's always an exciting match, there's always a great match, there's always some opportunity that you want to maximise. And so that's the balance of being an athlete. But, what would I advocate for? I'd actually make sure that athletes, particularly rugby players now, have the chance to have at least 4 to 6 weeks full rest. And I would advocate further that have 10 weeks of no contact to give your shoulders and your back and your neck and your brain, or to give everyone, all of that, just a break from contact. And I think over the course of the 52 weeks, it's probably should be feasible, but it's never in practice does it form out. So the question is, do you need to mandate or whatever? I don't know. I know people are working on player load guidelines a lot, but when at the back end of the career, when I played in the UK, life was a little bit more settled. You had a really defined off season. I'd just take 6 weeks off, I'd do a little bit here and there. I'd keep active, but that was, and then I would have a 6 to 8 week preseason. That was enough by that stage. I had enough load in my body to be able to tune it within 6 to 8 weeks, but you just don't have that early in your career either. So you do need to build up capacity and load over the years as well.
When you're younger as well, you haven't accumulated as much of the wear and tear, so you don't need it as much. And then by the time you do, that's not what you're in the habit of doing over the course of a 12-month calendar. I'm at the point now where for rowing, I would advocate the same thing. It's like, this is a 52-week year. To take 4 to 6 weeks to take a step back so you could take 3 forward makes a lot of sense. But then that requires that coaches and administrators and athletes, that everyone's on the same page and that they have a long-term view, but that's not often the case.
Well, the economics of it as well commercially don't work. Often less sport, unless you're in the NFL, but even they're expanding their remit away. But less games doesn't equal more money.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the same time, if you want the game to be growing commercially, if people want to get paid a little bit more, then it is genuinely a pound of flesh in there somewhere. Yeah. So therefore, how do you mandate it? How do you make it individualized? And so you can make rules based for the individual as well, because really most people in the team can be rotated out in phases to be able to give it. Rowing crews are different because you're so heavily reliant on cohesion, where rugby teams you're building a 30, 35 man squad or person squad in female teams, so you can allow for that rotation, and that's part of the good management of people and athletes as well.
Yeah, I'd say the season is longer. Like, there's going to be a round one in rugby, and then it's just a matter of how many games and what the postseason looks like and all of that, and depends on the year if it's a World Cup or not. But with rowing, it really is just a narrow point in time. At the Olympic Games, arguably, you need to be ready once every 4 years. Now you need to be prepared for that. So that's going to involve some competition, and you need to get qualified for that. So that's the year before. But there's just these events that really you would need to build a crew for. And so I think there should be a little bit more periodization to it, but we're singing from the same song sheet here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's one of the things I'm really interested in a work context is people also expect people to be functioning high level the whole time at work. It's just not feasible either.
Yeah.
You know, periodized working or the concept of people actually being really effective for if somewhere between 80 and 85% effective all of the time would be an amazing output for an organization. But yet you don't factor in rest and you don't factor, you rarely factor in load. You're happy to load someone up and expect the same result or a different output. And so I think conceptually, actually, it goes much broader than just athlete sense as well.
But it does seem as though the way things evolve in the workplace, that there is, it obviously would depend on the company, but there is more of a sense of that, if we want people to show up and be able to perform, then we need to take care of them. And then how they implement strategies in order to make that happen is going to be up to the company itself. But I was surprised having, gone from being an athlete and a coach, then for a period of time having a proper job in an office, nearly a proper job in an office, that you could just take leave.
Yeah.
You had leave that was allocated to you, and that you just had to notify the system or your manager, hey, this is what I'm going to do, because that was crazy as an athlete. Like, there's no chance that you could just go, I'm going to take 2 weeks off here, and all the best with whatever we're doing, and then I'll see you on the other side. Like,
Yeah.
it took me years to wrap my head around.
Yeah, no, it's a different concept, but I also don't think it's not as easy in the fact that whatever your work will have a flow, will have a peak period where you should be on, everyone should be out. And I just think sometimes there's that missing self-awareness where, maybe if I just scheduled in and I knew that I had 10-week blocks, a week off, or the maths doesn't quite work out there, but, 11 weeks off, 1 week off, and I knew that that would be the best outcome. It'd be a really interesting concept to see in practice.
Yeah. How's your body nowadays?
Yeah, pretty good, to be fair. I thought, I've had people that I've played with have had ankle fusions and hip replacements and knee replacements, but I sort of hold out all right. Although in saying it, my knee's hurting for some reason, but that's all right. But that happens, and so I think I'm really quite fortunate. I also, I'm sure similar to you. I also train. I train. Everyone trains for the physical benefit of it, but also it's really the transition when I speak to my mates now. We all train for the mental side of it more than anything else, and it's that sense of well-being that you get from it. And so I don't train to break any records. I think the records are behind me. Maybe not so much for you, mate.
I still think there's a little bit ahead of me, but I'm close enough to the other side that I drifted a bit into that the last couple of years because I'd never really trained to feel good. I didn't know what that was, and so I tried to get a bit of a taste of that, only to realize, no, I think there's still a bit to do in terms of pursuing. But once you accumulate some miles, because you have gone hard, then you have to make some decisions about, well, you've got limited time, you've got a body that is what it is, for better or worse. And then, well, what's important to me? Am I trying to kick ass? Am I trying to feel good on a day-to-day basis? Is it a combination of both of those? And it's going to be different for each person and at different times.
Totally, and it's interesting. I was giggling at your comment, like the training not to be sore and the training not to break records or to be near where you think you should be is not a concept that an athlete generally has. Maybe it's getting better, but if you're training to feel good, that's called recovery. It's not called training. And so, the idea of going for a walk actually took me a really long time after being a professional athlete that was a legitimate choice. of exercise.
Yeah.
And I don't love it. It's not gonna give me everything I want. But it's also some mornings I wake up and it's a mentally a struggle to get to the gym, and a walk presents as a perfectly good option to actually get peace of mind and feel good from it. And that's a concept that's not an athlete one, but it's taken a while to get used to. But now I'm pretty comfortable. It makes me think that I want to do more yoga and all those elements that make you feel good, but I still haven't quite found the balance yet.
I feel like most men should do more yoga, especially those that in their heart feel less inclined towards it. That it's an opportunity, and because it'll help you feel better. But even if it's feel better, so you could push harder in some other
Yeah,
place, or that too is a reason. And usually it's just getting over some of your own bullshit. It's also tricky when if you're no longer a elite athlete, you go from your day being set up around sport, and you've got support staff, people that care about your performance and therefore care about the training that you do, to no one cares, but you need to care. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, and then you really are not going to be in good shape. And I'd imagine you've got teammates that, injuries aside, that some are taking better care of themselves than others, and I think that's the same in post any elite sport.
yeah, totally. I just sort of say like it's perfectly reasonable that that's an option to take. That you just don't give a shit, or you have a couple of years off. But I'm sure that the longer you're out, the harder it is to come back. But nonetheless, I think all of us are hepped up on endorphins for quite a while because we've been on it. And it's nice to continue, to be fair. Now, like I train now, I train very functional in the weights room as I can. There's a great guy that just does a program that I just follow online, and it's super functional training. It's got some, it's a gymnastic strength in it. Things that I haven't done before that weren't relevant to what I used to do as a rugby player that now stimulates my mind, or I want to see that response with. And I think that's also part of the interest in doing it, as much as the physical response as well. Is like, oh, it's interesting. I haven't done that.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to do that. And there's lots of things in there now where I'd like, shit, that would have been really helpful
Yeah.
when I was
Yeah.
playing.
Yeah.
Like a lot of all of this sort of being strong through a full range as opposed to being strong in just a linear motion.
Yeah.
And having thoracic flexibility, like not underrated probably in any circumstance, but all those sort of things just weren't a consideration as opposed to getting in the room, getting it done, get out on the field, play on the weekend. And both sides are there, but the good athletes, I think, and this wasn't me, and this, and probably more so you, mate, was really exploring those parameters about what works for you as an individual, as opposed to taking what you've been told by the S&C. There's an element of that that's really important because you don't want to be a full outlier, and you want to do what the team's doing, because I think working together over time is a great element for cohesion. It's how you get better. But we're all different bodies. We all have different works. And my reflections probably didn't do enough of that while I played.
Yeah. I think you're right. I probably did, but that's because I figured out pretty early on. By the time I was at Princeton, one of my teammates, nice to meet you, he's 6'9", and you're like, well, there's a talent deficit here, right? Like if I show up, and he ended up we raced against each other in Beijing. He was in the USA that won bronze. He's a professional coach now, and because there was guys like him around and guys I knew that had gone to the Olympics, and I could see the differences. And then it doesn't make you any less determined. If anything, it made me more determined. But I realized if I just showed up to training and only did the same stuff that the guys in my squad did, then I wasn't going to improve even at the same rate that they were, let alone
Yeah.
try and move myself towards the top of that pile, which is what I wanted to do. one thing, we were connecting before in the conversations that you and you and Matt Ryan and then Matt and I had, and we could see you and Robbo, you and Hangers going on playing rugby, probably earning a decent quid, but and it seems you're doing fine in this regard now. But there was the one thing that we did have is like we're probably not going to be as beaten up by the time that we're not risking having ankle fusions, although Matty did have his back fused. So it's like, and we have paid I've had some heart stuff. Like you do pay a cost, but I remember thinking on the way in, if you play professional rugby, there's a reasonable chance that you're going to get a little beat up and maybe you come out unscathed, and that's great. Maybe you could do a bit to offset that, but there's always that chance. Was that something that you're aware of when you were making a career of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are, because you also go through and you meet the generation or the two generations before you, and you see them at a later stage. And I know I know a couple of people in the generation above me have now had double knee replacements and things like that, and they're sort of mid-50s. And so it does take a wear and tear. It was also, it's kind of the wisdom's wasted on, it's wasted on the youth, isn't it? Or youth is wasted. And so it's kind of that, but would you have changed it? No, not at all. Yeah. It was part of the deal. Probably what was different there is we weren't fully across the neurological side of it, and the repetitive head trauma effect. Does that change the deal? Yeah, I think it does for people, and people will question about it. But we weren't informed, so you didn't know. But the current generation certainly are, and certainly aware of it. But I think you're seeing, it's taken a while, but I think you're starting to see behaviours shift a little bit in there. And the wiser people are the ones that are realising that today's payday might have a longer term effect. And so how do you get that balance right? How do you not risk yourself? Because I think it's all different between, I used to say it's okay if you felt like you had a bad shoulder growing up, then when I was a bit older, it's probably worth it, to be fair, because your opportunity, your chance to go and see and do things and play these amazing games in front of crowds was worth it. But is neurological disorder worth it? It's a different question. And ultimately, I think there's I've done a lot of research from a risk point of view in it, because I work in risk and insurance, but it's probably, the researchers can certainly be fear-mongered significantly, and we probably don't know enough as we could at the moment, but there's certainly a lot you can do in any stage of your career, to protect your body and your mind. And I think that's probably the smartest way to do it, is know when you've got a little bit too much in the game and maybe you can pull back.
We're having this conversation. Realistically, for us, most of the super competitive stuff is in the rearview mirror, and some of the listeners, they might be similar vintage to us, but some of them might be at school or at uni where most of it's ahead of them. But for you and I can't speak for you, but I'd imagine it's the case that you think quite a bit about what it might look like for your kids. You're deciding what sports your kids play now, and then you can see what sports they might end up in. And the real litmus test is, how you feel. You've got two boys. How would you feel about your kids playing rugby, knowing what you know now about some of the risks?
Yeah, I mean, it's the relevant question. When my older boy does play rugby, and he does play, they're now in tackling. So it's, my youngest son actually started playing. He's 5. He's going to play 2 years of under sixes, but there's no contact for him. So it's not a consideration. Very happy for him to play. And I think it's great that he gets it and he likes it. I'm never going to force him to do something I don't want to like. But my older boy does play contact. I'm very aware of it if there's any concerns. But I also think you can come at it from a smarter way where you don't have to do just repetitive shot to train something. There's lots of ways you can train contact fitness that don't involve acceleration of the brain. Essentially, you can do jiu-jitsu, you can wrestle, you can do technique at a really low level. I think you can train it really smart to avoid. I mean, my view, it's just a load thing, all right? So it's like getting sunburned. So the longer you're in the sun, the more chance are getting sunburned, the more chance you are of getting skin cancer. It's the same thing. It's just a load piece. And so how do, over the course of a career, can you minimize expressions of load? And you can do that in training really effectively. And then in a game's a little bit unruly, but then you can take care and make sure there's full recovery should there be an incident or a suspected incident. And I think actually from there, if you segment it out, like in essence, the whole elephant's scary, but if you segment it down into bites, you actually can reduce significant portion of load across the course of a career. But in all the data I've seen, for anyone that's listening, because I do some stuff at World Rugby level, that really the game is the area where the contact happens, where the high head force accelerations happen. The training is less so, but really it's the elite game where you've got big people and big physics clashes, like big hits. That's where it's happening. At a junior age, the data looks more friendly, and I think the argument is the ability to play team sport, the ability to feel comfortable, to feel a bit afraid from time to time when you take on some of these challenges as you're growing up. That in my mind, it's currently worth it. Now, if that changes and the information changes, then I've got to make a different decision.
Yeah.
But on the balance of probabilities, that's where I see it at the moment.
You also have to trust the coaches that you have that are responsible for your kids, that they're aware and making the decisions, because at a certain point, it's not like it's up to you to an extent, but you have to hand over the reins and you need to hope that they have, like, the whole proposition falls apart if they don't have good coaches making sensible decisions.
Yeah, totally. But the reality is also people are making decisions based on a more informed approach than when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And so you could argue that it's a way safer game, or most contract sports are way safer than they need to be. Do I want him to go into boxing and be a full-time sparring partner against boxers that are way better than him? Probably not,
Yeah.
But when there's a sensible approach taken to any sport, I mean, it's all about risk and risk appetite. And if you're willing to take it on in a controlled environment, then I think the upside is definitely worth it. But that might change in time as more research comes. But based on what I know now, that's how I see it.
Yeah. And I asked because you've had more skin in the game. And I say this to someone that played rugby for 12 years, never got concussed playing rugby, but had a bunch of concussions outside of rugby. And I think about it with my kids because I've got them, at least my son, starting to do some version of training and sport. And I could just tell from the physicality that he's probably going to like contact sports. And then you think about, well, what sort of life do you want for your kids? And trying to make it a informed decisions as opposed to she'll be right. And I also say this to someone, my favorite sport to watch is mixed martial arts. So I'm on board with controlled contact and sometimes uncontrolled contact, but believe you should go into things with eyes open.
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference. But I mean, you can't tell anyone how to make their own decision. It's going to be what they want ultimately. But I certainly know as your kids get older and you see some kids over another, some kids just crave a little bit of contact as well.
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned before that at a certain point, it's the same thing as a rower. You're a rugby player. Your self-identity is connected to the thing that you do, and that's probably enhanced more when you're an athlete and there's some celebration of you doing that thing. There's a lot of support. Did you get to a point when it was towards the end of your rugby career, I'm thinking this sort of transition out. What was it like to have to let go of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fortunate that I got to do it on my own terms. And I kind of probably, by the time I retired, I'd sort of done everything I wanted to do, to be fair. And maybe enhanced by the fact that I played for the Wallabies, which was kind of the pinnacle of reaching national level and playing international competition, which is awesome. Like, it is really the greatest challenge. And but then I didn't do that for 3 or 4 years, so I wasn't picked for another while, and just wasn't good enough really during that period compared to the competition. But then got a second chance at it, and so was really able to be super mindful about the opportunity that it was, and to be given to play at that, and then to do that I did that for another sort of, I don't know, 20 tests, 25 tests or something, but every one of them felt like a real treat. And so by the end of that, I was actually really grateful for the second chance at it and could then happily move on. I mean, I actually made the decision to retire, albeit prematurely, and I didn't, but I told my coach at Exeter that I was going to retire in 2015, and I was going to try and go to, off to University, Oxford or Cambridge, and play in the varsity game and do all those sort of things. But then there was a World Cup coming up, and I'd never done that. And if I retired then and not given it a shot, I probably would have looked back quite longingly on it and saying, well, there was stuff I missed, an opportunity. But then to have a shot, whether I motivated or not, and to hang it out there was something. It was some of my fondest memories, to be in camps where you don't know where you're going to make the next cut. You've got to turn up that week, that session, absolutely exhausted. But it was great to really hang it out, and it was a real growth period for me. And I had a really strong understanding why I was there and what I was trying to do, which probably wasn't as strong first time round. And so I could then quite happily sail off into the sunset as such. But which makes the transition easier. But the transition also, I'd seen people do it well before me, and the people that transitioned well had been, where they could, they tried to work while they played. So they tried to understand whether or not the environment, like, I didn't know whether I could sit at a desk and type away and be happy, or I didn't know whether I wanted to be outside or, a school teacher or whatever. But it happened that I tried this. I'd spoken to a number of people, did some form of research, whether or not you don't think you'd ever can do enough. But I'd had some great conversations. I've had some really shit conversations, and but ultimately I've been able to work it out. And so I worked 1 day a week for the last 18 months that I played. Sort of knew where I wanted to go. Kind of like, I like the people I was working with, and that's a really important part of your work day.
Yeah. And you mentioned, like, we both represented our country and will always be able to take pride in that. But I find that by the time you're there, you care quite a bit about the results. It's not just about the jersey or the tracksuit. It's about how you perform. And you're not a World Cup champion. I'm not an Olympic gold medalist. So we're able to do these things at the highest level, but maybe not with the results you could hang your hat on. And if you played for Tonga and I rode for Papua New Guinea, maybe that wouldn't be reasonable, but Australia's won Olympic gold medals in rowing, and Australia's won a Rugby World Cup. Do you, having finished and know that that's no longer on the table, was that something that you ever felt mixed emotions about, or that you weren't able to slay that dragon, or is that something where you can only do your part and so you have to live with the results?
Yeah, listen, I got, runners-up medals, and runners-up medals aren't as good as winners. We all, know that. But also, I kind of you can flip it the other way and say, well, I had an opportunity to play in a Super Rugby final, and I had an opportunity to play in a World Cup final, and not many people have had that. The same as, you've got medals, and not many people have rode in the final of an event in the Olympics, and so understood the occasion, the momentum. You know, one of my favourite things in sport is finals week. Wherever you are, if you're playing in the grand final, because there's only two teams now training. Everyone else has gone, they've packed up, they're done for the year, they've had Mad Monday, they've screwed up, and you're in, and you're still in that week. And that's gold, and I love that week. You know, whether or not you win or you lose, you've had that experience, and I think that's the way I reflect on it. And, you know, my medals happen to be silver, not gold, but it doesn't mean that the occasion wasn't pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is a matter of perspective, right? And it was curious to see what, where you landed on that, because a different person with the same results may feel differently. And it's like everything in life is how you interpret the experiences that you've had and are having. On experience is one thing I just want to touch on our way out here is you trekked to the North Pole, which is something you did post rugby and for charity. So how did that come to be?
So we've got two boys. We've actually got four kids because we lost four kids on the way through. So we got Sophie, Henry, Ella, and Grace, who are twins. So three separate occasions where we were pregnant and we didn't come to fruition. They're all born preterm in different stages for different reasons. And so by the time that Alfie was born, he was sort of the third pregnancy we had. And we were obviously incredibly grateful that he was born. And we had this absolutely amazing obstetrician that helped us out in the UK, did everything under the NHS. So we were taking care with the best possible care because, he wanted to help us out more than anything else. So we felt incredibly grateful indeed to Professor Johnson. And so when we were in the UK, we went to the dinner, told our story, tried to help raise some money. When we came back to Australia, we thought, well, we should continue that with the guys that we want to help. We think we've got great research talent here in Australia, so how do we promote that and connect them with the world and fund them? So that's what we did. That's what we continue to do now. But in the last year that I was playing sport, Borne in the UK rang me and said, hey, listen, we're going to go to the North Pole. Do you want to come and join? And that's not an automatic yes for people that live in Australia, because we don't do a lot of snow, and the North Pole's a long way away. And but after a while, I thought, well, it's obviously clearly an epic opportunity. I knew I was going to retire, and it's kind of one off. I look at the photos. Actually, I was looking at a couple of photos, and I thought that just looks amazing, absolutely amazing. And so I'd never cross-country skied before, but then by the time you sort of got to Spitsbergen, which is this sort of archipelago and islands above Norway, I did 25 minutes of cross-country skiing, thought I'll probably get through this, and then took off and landed on the ice the next day, and away we were. So wasn't very prepared. Didn't really conceptualise the risk to it, to be fair, because at one stage we were about 3 inches. We were walking on 3 inches of ice above the Arctic Ocean with a 40-kilo sled on you. You're strapped into a 40-kilo sled. So things weren't going to go great if that ice cracked. But I didn't really conceptualise that much, to be fair, until I
Does it ever, for people that are trying to get there, does that happen on occasion? Or
yeah, it happens. Well, essentially what you do is it's all ice. I mean, there's no landmass. So you just move from one iceberg or ice flow, as they're called, for another. And it's actually the world's biggest amusement park, because you know where you got to go. You just got to go north, and then you'll get there at some stage. There's no pole, because everything moves as well. And so you either come across and the ice either pulls apart and you've got open water, which was frequent, which we saw a couple of times, or comes together and creates these pressure ridges, which you've got to try and get across open ice on skis on. Which is all fun. But you just got to work. You just got to work your way there. And to be fair, fucking knew nothing about this, and so just thought, hey, I'll do it. But the bit that was most daunting for me really was that you actually got to pretty much spend most of that day. You're out for 8 to 10 hours walking by yourself, and so there's a little bit of interaction. You come together when you stop and have a break, but particularly in areas of safe when the ice is really thin, you've got to be like 50 to 100 meters apart, just going by yourself in your own head. And that was
To distribute the load so it's never too much at once.
yeah, that's right. That's right. But that was the bit that for me I thought would be the real challenge of what I'd come up with and find. But it's so peaceful up there. There's no sound, there's no noise, there's no animals, and it's just one of the most remarkable places you could go.
Yeah, what an opportunity.
Yeah, so good. I mean, like, who would have thought? But, like, it's also, turns out it's rare because you can only do it 1 month a year, basically, just after the sun comes up, for the one day in the north, and but before it gets too warm and the ice melts. And so you've got this really finite window. Also, in that period of time, the Russians are the ones that put a camp down on the ice, and they actually use helicopters and they kind of paratroop people in to check on the ice, and then they use big Chinooks to helicopter up tractors that build a runway that then creates the opportunity for you to go. So it's like logistically a nightmare to get there. But the Russians aren't as much in favour at the moment, so I don't know how they're actually doing all this. But I know less people have been to the North Pole than have been to the top of Everest.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Is like we spent all this time talking about rugby, and you put more time into it, and it's perceived as more elite. And perhaps it is, but maybe less rare.
Yeah, less rare. I mean, just different, I think is the way to put it.
Yeah. Well, mate, thanks so much for the chat. Appreciate the time. Like, if I'm not sure if the listener might be able to see, but if they're just hearing, you're in the office, you've taken the time to have a chat with me, and me and my listeners appreciate it, mate.
No worries. Yeah, great to talk to you again, mate.
Thanks, Dean.